And now we want to look at the projections made by the African Development Bank as regards the economic growth in the year 2023. AFDB released its report, and the projection says that the economic growth in Africa fell by 3.1% in the year 2023, compared to 4.1% recorded in the year 2022 within the same period. However, AFDB has also predicted all high indices for the year 2024. What will be the implication of these? How is this going to play out in coming months? That's what our in-house analyst is going to provide his perspective as regards this. We're being joined by Sam Orovwuje. Sam, glad to have you join us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. My pleasure to be here.
Always my pleasure to be your host, and I'm delighted to have you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So let's focus on this projection. You know how sensitive the role of African Development Bank is when it comes to the African economy. And if this bank says anything, it's something to go by. Now, according to the report, the projection for the year 2023, was the fact that the economic growth fell by 3.1%. And also compared to the same year in 2020, the same period in 2022, where the statistics was 4.1%. What will you say about the African economy in recent times? What are some of the realities that have been playing out in the last few months, and what are the issues that might likely be contended with in the following months?
The African Development Bank is a development bank that is saddled with the responsibility in trying to improve on development across Africa. So those projections are based on the indicators that drove economic growth in 2023. Regrettably, there was a drop in terms of percentage growth. But the projection for 2024 is that there's a likelihood that there's going to be about 4-point-something% growth. So if that 4.1 or thereabout growth that is being envisaged by the African Development Bank shows that there are greater opportunities in terms of economic growth across Africa. So it's not a bad news after all, even though we had issues in 2023. And those issues are essentially about inflation, unemployment, the high level of poverty across many African countries. But the projection for about 4.1 for 2024 shows a positive outlook for 2024. Therefore, for us to be able to sustain that outlook, various countries within Africa must see how they can improve on productivity, improve on infrastructures, and equally see how they can integrate the informal sector, which is the real sector of the economy, so that we can enhance productivity, thereby increasing economic prosperity for Africa. So those projections are not too ambitious. I think if there's discipline and there's the loans that are given by the African Development Bank to various countries within Africa are properly channeled for development, then we'll be able to sustain that projection.
Now, let's look at some of the factors highlighted by AFDB, some of the factors that shaped the economy in 2023 and might likely also affect the economy, the African economy in 2024. The first thing that the AFDB talked about is political instability. You're aware of the military takeover in some of African countries, Mali and the rest of them. Talk to us. How do you think this will impact the economic performance for Africa for the year 2024? Taking reference from the example that we had in 2023.
I think generally that forecast in terms of political stability is a major trend analysis when you're looking at economic growth and other development indicators. So there are some issues in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger that may have slowed down. But on the other hand, Niger has have a positive impact in spite of those challenges. So we cannot really say in its entirety the impact of political instability in some of those countries. But if you look at even what is happening in Senegal, where the Macky Sall is trying to alter the election time, that will have negative impact for Senegal economic growth. But by and large, beyond political instability, once the governments are using some of those loans, in particular the African Development Bank has different initiatives for energy, renewable energy, infrastructure to various countries. So once those loans are channeled to development, I'm sure that we're able to sustain that projection of about 4.1 growth for the year, in spite of the challenge that we had in 2023. It was a positive indicator in 2022. But those shocks that negatively impact on development for 2023, if the governments are able to tighten their belt, particularly the cost of living that has gone up remarkably. I read in the papers just this morning, there were protests even in Kenya in respect of cost of living that has gone up. So if the individual countries are able to see how they can reflate the economy, put more food on the table for citizens, they will be able to drive growth, and growth can lead to development.
According to this report, part of the references has to be the Russia's war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. You're aware of the Black Seal deal and what happened to it, and the sensitivity of what Russia represents to Africa or African economy. Now, according to this report, that was what part of what influenced the statistics for 2023, and that might likely still happen in 2024, if you agree or disagree. But what should be the action point for African nations if there's no sign the war is going to stop soon? And that's also a factor to contend with in 2024. How do you see this playing out? What should be the narrative for African nations who depend on Russia for this, for one particular deal or the other, to begin to change the narrative so that we can have a better economic performance in the year 2024?
Femi, I think essentially beyond Russia, our dependence in terms of import is a major challenge. And that indicator that negatively impacts Africa is talking about the disruption in the food supply chain, particularly grains from Ukraine to Africa. So we are blessed with some climate that can sustain the growth of wheat in Africa. So African government must look inward to see how they can provide additional food security, making more investment in agriculture so that we can get ourselves from the international shock that is occasioned by the crisis in Ukraine. The issues of Russia versus Ukraine can be managed adequately to sustain economic growth. So the message here is that we need more investment in agriculture. We need to develop a sustainable value chain that will help to improve on food security for Africa. So if this is addressed, that again will be able to reverse the negative trend that we had in 2023.
Are you surprised that AFDB also make reference to China's slow economic turnout in the year 2023 as also one of the factors that affected, the economic growth for Africa in the year 2023? Does that portray to you how sensitive the role of China is in Africa?
No, it's not negative to that extent, but the impact in China, because in recent time, a lot of the development loans that are driven by concession loans came from India. So there was a massive infrastructure investment across so many countries in Africa. So the economic downturn, to a very large extent in China, had a negative impact in 2023 because some of those loans that fast-track development in Africa, we couldn't access some of them. But in recent time, some of those projects that were stopped halfway, new negotiations are taking place, and I'm sure that more of those concession loans will come in this year. And I think one of those factors equally has impacted positively in the projection that was made by the African Development Bank. And I'm sure that 2024, the story might be different. And China itself is making some new investment opportunities, new policy framework that will support their investment in Africa. So that we, in the long run, impact in terms of economic growth.
You see, one of the things that will also influence economic growth in any place, any country, and it has to be the level of production, local production. In Africa, that's been a challenge where some of the African countries the economies are import-driven. We have to import virtually everything we consume. Now, what should be the starting point in the year 2024 for African nations to start looking independent when it comes to its production level? And then the issue of energy or power supply is also another factor. What are the solutions to all this for Africa to actually take its place in the continent?
My conversation in the last 1 year has been that there must be some political will within the African leadership, at the level of the African Union, at the level of other sub-regional system, to see how we can sustain the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I think should be a major impetus to African development, to reverse some of the over-reliance on import dependence that African has been bedeviled with over the years. So this is a new policy framework which, if the leadership of African countries can see how they can trade among themselves to enhance intra-African trade, that will help to stimulate economic growth. So that's the first. Number two, the level of exploitation of our primary commodities must be recalibrated by, again, the leadership to see how, rather than taking the primary commodity outside for the West and even China and Russia, as the case may be, there's a need to find a way to see how this primary commodity can be exploited within Africa so that it can create more productivity for the growing population of Africa. If these two factors, among other factors, are addressed critically, then the economic prosperity of African will improve. But we need that mind shift or mind engineering for the leadership to know that we cannot always look to Beijing, Washington, London, any of these places to resolve our issues. So we must look inward. Even as a collective, as a people, we must equally look into how we can improve on the way we do business among ourselves as Africa so that we can retain some foreign exchange, which is one of the challenges that we have in recent time. All right.
It's a public knowledge that Africa should collaborate, and I think most leaders will agree with you that there's a need to collaborate. But you always have those barriers, barriers to this collaboration. What are some of these imminent barriers, and what can be done to manage them so that Africa will be able to collaborate when the season of economic blocks, economic ties and partnership, and Africa should not be left out?
The issue with collaboration in Africa essentially has to do with what you call colonial heritage. Since Africa was divided among various countries that divided these things along colonial fault lines, this has been a major challenge. So the issues of French, Portuguese, English, colonial lines I see a major impediment to our development. So beyond the clamor for collaboration, leadership must think beyond these colonial lenses that have blurred our development thinking, so that we can find a way to break these barriers, so that we can trade among ourselves in spite of the language. So we must find a way to see how we can improve on the language, that we can trade among ourselves, and those barriers will no longer be an impediment in terms of economic growth and development.
What is Special Day? February 20th, a special day dedicated for social justice globally. Give us a perspective to what social justice is all about for our viewers to understand the subject.
All right, the United Nations dedicate today, February 20, what you call World Social Justice Day, and the day is set aside by the United Nations to highlight the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly from the point of view of how social justice, welfare to citizens are sustained over a period of time. On the other hand, it equally deals with issues of labor mobility, in terms of employment justice, fair wage, fair salaries, and people are not excluded in terms of opportunities across the globe. So essentially, it's to talk about what they call DEI, which diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Now, the theme for this year is bridging gaps and building alliances. And according to the report being released now, there are also challenges associated with this issue of building gaps and alliances. Why do you think it's a challenge in 2024 to build alliances? And also, what are some of the barriers for people to collaborate when it comes to distribution of wealth and to enhance social justice globally?
All right, I think number one, when you talk about social justice, there's a need to collaborate. I just talked about fair wages, which in literature talk about wealth in its totality, in its generic form. So if you're able to collaborate, then you're able to take care of the diversity in the workplace. You talk about welfare. You talk about sustainable wages across board. Then to what extent can you redistribute wealth and bridge the gap between the rich and the very poor in society? To what extent can you reduce multidimensional poverty that has bedeviled the world in recent times? So collaboration, alliances will help to reduce the barrier that currently exists between the global north and the global south. So those alliances will help to redistribute wealth among nations for the common prosperity of the global citizen.
Before we dwell more on these barriers, there are those who argue that to maintain social justice in the society, it's difficult to have equality. Perhaps it should be equity. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the principle is more of equity. Equality, generically speaking, is a language that is often used. But if you look at life itself, even the way God has created the human race.
After all, there's all hands or fingers are not equal.
Yeah, so, but equity is that when people are provided opportunity based on their various configurations, there's opportunity for everybody. So you talk about gender equity, you talk about representation, you talk about fair wage for all. You don't need to put what they call feminization of poverty that is domiciled with women. So equity will open up the space for everybody to play according to the opportunity that exists and based on their capacity. So when you talk about diversity, you don't need to deal with people based on where they come from. Racism and some other things that are barrier in the workplace will be dealt with. So inclusion, you talk about access to market, access to loan, and access to other housing facility. So people should have equal access based on the opportunity, based on their God-given talent. So equity is the proper word to use. So social justice deals essentially with the DI mechanism, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So once you're able to deal with that, almost everybody will be taken care of in society. On the other hand, the rule of law and democracy is equally essential to be able to get social justice. Rule of law, democracy, and freedom of speech. Once it's guaranteed, then that's part of social justice mechanism that can help the world to grow better, and we can live more harmoniously once there's social justice.
Let's look at the challenges being posed by language, tribalism, some of the barriers to social justice, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. How much of setback could that bring to social justice in the world?
Countries across Africa, in terms of language barrier, there are partnership in terms of how to improve the language ecosystem within Africa. The Portuguese countries taking English as a second language to enhance a relationship in Africa. In Nigeria, for example, there's a partnership to train people on how to speak the French language, and in other areas. So these partnerships over time in terms of the language barrier will be improved upon, where people can be bilingual in terms of their language knowledge, which can improve. So therefore, there are people that are bilingual, so it doesn't reduce the opportunity. So if you can speak French, you can migrate from Nigeria to Senegal to work. If you can speak English, sometimes if you are bilingual, that will help in improving the social justice ecosystem.
Looking at the concept of social justice, it also has to do with fair distribution of wealth and resources. Now, let's take a reference from Nigeria, where you have people who claim to be marginalized, and perhaps that could be fueling the call for restructuring here and there, restructuring the allocation of state resources. Do you think there's a need to also look inward in a country like Nigeria to see how this restructuring can be done to promote social justice? And what's your take on the distribution of wealth in Nigeria? Do you think there's uneven distribution, even looking at the gap between the rich and the poor?
A country that has over 89 point something people within the poverty gap, currently multidimensional poverty is a major challenge. Therefore, there's a major gap between the rich and the poor. So there's urgent need to redistribute wealth. And how do you do that? You tax the very rich with a view to bringing more money to those who are below the poverty line in society. So when you talk about restructuring, it's a bit political, but then I always speak to economic restructuring by a way where this resource, which some people don't like to speak to. And I think one of the major things that can bring about social justice is to see how the resources are given to states or regions that produce those resources, and they're able to pay something to the center. That will help to a very large extent, in my view, to redistribute wealth. But when you look at the political connotation in the country where there's a mutual suspicion or a divide between the north and south, between the east and the west, when that political coloration becomes the order of the day, becomes difficult to look at the real issues when you want to address wealth redistribution to enhance social justice. And there's a new clamor, which is a call for state police that will enhance social justice. The fear is that the governors will hijack that. But let's start with that process, even if it's state police, before we come to economic and social justice. This will help to see how the gap between the rich and the poor. And you can see the direct relationship between poverty and criminality. So you see the banditry, if you look at the graph, going up speedily. You have kidnapping, you have terrorism, all kinds of armed banditry all over the country. They have direct relationship with poverty. So, and that, when there's poverty, then there's no social justice. So we need to address those issues.
All right. You earlier talked about the issue of rule of law. Looking at the level of adherence to rule of law in Africa, it's something debatable. And there's always this saying that justice must just not be served, must also be seen to be served. Now, in instances in Africa where you have people who don't obey court order, court proceedings, and who don't respect things like that, how challenging will it be to be able to promote social justice if justice is not just being served or being seen to be served?
I think there's a greater call to action. When you talk about social justice, the other overlapping driver when you talk about social justice. So the reform, security sector reform, is needed to be able to sustain social justice. So we don't just talk about the judicial process alone. There must be an interlink between security itself, policing, the armed forces. We need some reform, then the judicial process, particularly the police, in terms of prosecution processes. The delays that you get in the court system to get justice. So we need a reform, entire reform, called the security sector reform, which includes policing, the way we prosecute people, what are other mechanisms. You talk about alternative dispute resolution mechanism. To what extent can we put these things in place so that where there are infraction into the law, you're able to resolve those issues quickly. And it's only the rule of law and democratic values that can promote social justice.
Now, let's look at some of the critical stakeholders that are very crucial when it comes to maintaining social justice in the society. You have that of the traditional institution. What should be their role? You also have the local government, which is where the governance starts. It's closer to the people. You also have the family. So let's start with these three people, these three stakeholders. What should be their role? Talking about local government, the traditional institutions, and then the family. Maybe we make reference to parents as well.
For me, I want to call for a constitutional review that will accommodate traditional rulers. When we had the regional system of government, we had a space for traditional ruler in the parliament, because indeed, constitutional rule for traditional rulers. In the past, particularly the Western regional government, you had the House of Chiefs, which had a parliamentary opportunity for traditional rulers to be part of parliament because they are really closer to the people. That, again, will help to a very large extent to bridge the gap where the traditional rulers have been relegated to the background. The call for local government autonomy to a very large extent, which is closer to the people, may equally improve on social justice. So if we're able to do that constitutional reform to accommodate traditional rulers, they have a great role in terms of conflict resolution mechanism, particularly at the local level. Once conflicts are resolved and people see that justice is served, then they feel that they have a place in society, then we can sustain social justice.
I made reference to the role of the local government and then family.
No, family is the beginning, is one of the social institutions where people, so the values that the family are able to sustain, there's a disruption in family values, which dovetails into the larger society's value. So the family has a major role. Do we serve justice at the family level between husband and wife, between siblings? That's what we call sibling rivalries. How do you resolve those sibling rivalries at the family level? So family as the gatekeeper in terms of social institutions that will lead to social justice have a greater role to play. So we need to sustain values at the family level that provide justice. So if you are serving 2 pieces of meat to fathers and children are taking a quarter of that, I don't think there's even justice at the family level. So equity is important, inclusion is important. So, but this value must be sustained fundamentally from the family level.
There are those who argue as well that when you talk about gender equality, is also a challenge, whereby you're trying to promote, some are trying to promote feminism, while others on the other hand feel, okay, what a man can do, a woman can do better. You hear that a lot. Now, so this argument comes in about gender inclusion, the issue of equity or equality. What should be the narrative when it comes to gender inclusion?
I think the challenge here is that culturally we're in a particular society that is male-dominated over the years. So this clamor to mainstream gender into development, into policy, is a welcome development. But people see feminism from a negative paradigm. Feminism means about focusing on women with the peculiarity, and rather than seeing women as second fiddle based on the way society is configured, there's a need to provide equity. And the only way you can bring that equity is to find a way to put a policy in place that represents specific gender, particularly the female gender, to be able to come to speed with the male gender. So certain affirmative action over the years has been instituted by women to say, okay, give us 35% in terms of political representation, though we're not there. But more often than not, people try to push those narrative down as if they are asking that the opportunities are there. Why are we looking at the female gender specifically? But culturally, they've been subjugated to a lower level over the period of time. So this negative idea of feminism, where people see feminism as people who want to behave larger, in quotes now, than men. But they are just asking that their voice must be heard. They should come to the table to be represented. They must have a place, whether in politics, whether in the workplace. Once you meet the basic requirement, then you must factor those representations. So I don't think the female gender is asking for too much. We need to mainstream them into policies and programs that will bring them to speed with men, So it's part of social justice. So inclusion is a word to use here. So women are doing very well, and they even do better in some cases than men. So we need to mainstream them generally.
Okay, let's wrap up with this. What kind of advocacy will you expect on a day like this to be able to promote the essence and the gospel, if I may use that word, of social justice globally?
Let's look at it from the country approach, whether in the workplace, whether it's in political space. The concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion must be uppermost in every policy framework in the workplace. So there must be a gender balance in terms of your recruitment practices, in terms of political practices, in terms of promotion. So equal to a very large extent, I use that word advisedly, must be open to everybody. Once there's a consideration where diversity is uppermost, where equity is considered in decision-making process, even whether at the family, whether at the political level, whether at the business level, even people-to-people relationship, then that will help to sustain a day like this. So the advocacy is that we must put in place everything that represents social justice.
What a way to wrap up this conversation. It's been very engaging and also educating speaking with you, Sam Orovwuje. Thank you so much for your time, your submission on the issue of social justice. No doubt, you are the right man for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.